Hey, folks, and welcome into the show for Thursday. Good old Thursday show. How about that? For March 20th. How about that? March 20th, 2025. Now, for those of you who are wondering what's happening here, you might be thinking to yourself, especially on the YouTube side. On the podcast side, it may not be that much of a difference because it's not live. But if you're live on the YouTube, you may be thinking to yourself, this isn't live. This is a premiere probably, or a video that you uploaded. What do you mean you're live? Well, I mentioned this on the previous show, being episode 79, that because of this week being what it is, and it's a little bit chaotic with, of course, I'm on spring break because I am a grad student, and a lot of different things happening. The schedule wouldn't work out for me to be able to do a show on Thursday live during my usual time. So to sort of compensate for that, figured we could still do a show, but it's going to have to be recorded. So that's what it is. So if you're wondering why it's set to premiere and on YouTube, again, for the Spotify version, it's not really matter because it's not live. But for the YouTube side of things, yes, it is not a live show. It's recorded. So just make sure you guys know that. This is recorded actually after, on Tuesday. Today is actually the 18th. So it's a couple of days ago, guys, if you're listening to this, that I'm recording back-to-back shows. Just at the live show, episode 79, and now we're doing episode 80. How about that? 80 episodes. 20 more episodes until you get to the sacred number for syndication, being 100. At least that's what it used to be. I don't know if it's still the case now, but to my knowledge, it was 100. But anyway, this show is going to be sort of an evergreen show. If you don't know what an evergreen show is in the business of television production, it's a show where you can sort of air anytime during the year. So it's a show that's not necessarily tied to a certain time period per se. It's more just a generalized, show that talks about various different things that don't really have, again, much of a meaningful impact on current times. And it's a show that you can air anytime during the year, especially for TV. But for a podcast, it's a show or an episode you can listen to really anytime. It's not a show that's tied to a certain topic or a breaking news thing. Now, generally, most of our shows are evergreen, but this show in particular is going to be a mostly pure evergreen show. There might be a few topics that are somewhat tied to specific events happening during this week, which is the week of the 18th, March 18th, 2025. But the topics, not so much. At least at the moment, they're mostly going to be evergreen topics, things that will probably not change. So this show mostly going to be a Q&A based. Got some thoughts on Deion Sanders' comments about spring games. I'll touch on that. Also, some news about college ball 26, EA Sports College Ball 26. Mostly about behind-the-scenes stuff, not necessarily about the release or the cover has came out at the time of recording this, but some news on that. But then after that, rest of the show got 10 or so questions for Q&A. First time ever doing a proper Q&A. Some pretty meaty questions in here. Some of these questions, too, could have been show topics, but these are topics that we would have done on the normal Thursday show, but we're not able to get to properly. So I'm just compiled these into a Q&A. Some of these are basic questions or whatever that you guys might be wondering. Some of you actually asked me these questions, but anyway, if you are new here listening to this on the premiere on the podcast feed, first of all, welcome in. Be sure to subscribe to the channel. Make sure you do that. Click the button where it says subscribe. You don't have to click on the bell for notifications, not required, but we would generally like you to do that. It helps out a little bit. At least growing the channel a little bit. We're at 4 subscribers at the moment of recording this, and we're still growing. Been around for almost a whole year. Our 1-year anniversary is coming up pretty soon, so that's fun. Probably we'll do something special for that. Definitely we'll do something special for the 100th episode, but again, just be sure you subscribe. YouTube channel, podcast feed, and on Twitter as well. For verticals on Twitter, the actual tagline, I think it's _pod, I believe, if I recall correctly. I shouldn't do that because I own the account. But a little bit of a Q&A, a little bit of some breaking news that weren't fitting into the Tuesday show as I'm recording this on the Tuesday. And much like the Tuesday show, I might have to sneeze here for a second. So as I'm recording this, so I'm going to mute. If I do have to sneeze, I'll mute the microphone, but either one of these, but I don't think I'm going to. So felt one coming in, but I don't think I'm going to. But Uh, Almost got there, but close enough. However, close enough, but almost sneezed there, but I can feel it coming. But luckily I didn't have to. On the show we did a few minutes ago, the live show, I did. So anyway, awkward introduction aside, let's actually get into this. So again, mostly Q&A here, some off the top. Well, not off the top. Also some more relevant news to today as well. So we'll just go and hop in. Sort of the first question I usually get from most people who know me personally, or maybe some of you guys are asking me as well, or have wondered as well, is do I have a favorite college football team? The easy answer to that is actually no. I don't have a college football team that I cheer for specifically. Now, I do have a NFL team that I cheer for, being the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Recently went to a game this past a couple months ago. I said this past January. It was this January. A few months ago. A lot of fun. It was the Saints game. Great time. Maybe in a future Q&A, I'll maybe dive into that more, my experience there. But there's a lot of things you guys could probably ask me, or some of these questions I have that you don't answer. But in terms of favorite college football team, not really. I don't really have one per se. It's more of just I like the sport in general. I just like the sport of college football. I've liked it for a long time. What really got me into it, really what really drove me into getting into college football was really through the college football video game, NCAA 14. One day I just started playing it. I was like, yeah, I mean, that's kind of cool. You had these, players who at the time were real players. It's circa 2013. NCAA 14 was reflective of 2013 style college football with the players and the rosters, not the real names or anything, but it was the real players. I guess for me, it's like, man, this is so cool. I can actually watch college football, but also play it out on a video game. So even when the season's over, when the national championship occurs, I can still have Saturdays in the fall, just be Saturdays or any day during the spring and summer. And that was really cool to me. And when I figured out, this is, me as a youth back in the day, when I found out through just learning more about the video game itself, that the video game was going away. And it's the last one. It kind of drove me into, it was pretty sad. And I think for a lot of you guys, you have felt the same way. But yeah, favorite college football team, I don't really have one per se. It's mostly just, I like college football in general. Like the Pac-12, used to be the Pac-12, old Pac-12, Big 12, ACC, Big 10. Just love college football. Love all the teams. Washington, Oregon, Houston. I can name all of them, right? Missouri, Ball State, Buffalo, Virginia, South Florida, Tulsa, Florida Atlantic. Love all of them. Love all of college football. Man, I cover it all the time on the show per se. Like if I were to do like a journalist segment on like Jacksonville State football or Florida Atlantic football or Georgia Southern, Georgia State, you name it. But I still like it. Still watch all the games, even the G5s. I watch some of those on a given Saturday. But yeah, I don't really have a favorite college football team. I just like the sport in general. I just like the largeness of it and the regional side of things. And that's what I've always liked about it, how it was just very regional, like the conferences and everything. Look, I've had people I've talked to you personally before mention to me, well, yes, the regional aspect of that's fun, but don't you not like it how it's national now and people are getting more eyes on it? And people were still watching it back when it was regional. That's what I liked about it. It was still regional to a certain extent, but people were still watching college football. You were still having people who are just, general fans who watch the NFL and NBA still watching it. But now it's so commercialized now, and it's reflecting more of the NFL, and I don't think it really should be reflecting it because the system wasn't broken. But I've already went on my whole spiel about that on previous shows. I'm not doing that here. But favorite college football team, not really. I guess the one I grew up nearby, in a sense, the one I grew up the closest to was actually several. Bama. I used to live in the state of Alabama for a while. Auburn, Georgia, the Mississippi schools, Tennessee. Those are probably the schools I grew up nearest to. Actually, I think the closest one was actually, Vanderbilt, actually. Based on where I used to live growing up as a youth. Yeah, it would have been Vanderbilt. The closest one. But of course, you don't really hear much about Vanderbilt in the state of Alabama or even in like Georgia, Mississippi. It's mostly dominated by the other schools. But yeah, those are the schools I were nearest to. And of course, I have people in my personal life who may have personal interest in some of those schools. And, they're alumni and they donate and stuff like that. And they, emotionally invest themselves into it. But me, I sort of went away from trying to emotionally invest in a certain school, especially even now with the show now, where I love all of college football. I don't specifically enjoy covering the SEC only. I enjoy covering the Big 10, Big 12, ACC, you know. Those are the schools that I generally, or just the schools I also generally like as well. I like all college football. So, yeah, no real favorite college football team per se, but for the NFL, I do have one. That's Buccaneers. The second question here, what year do I consider to be the best in college football? I think I did a topic on this a while ago, but since we have a lot of new viewers coming in, figured why not just rehash it here now, since we're in the spring now. This is the proper time to do it. I think I did this back in the summer. But the best year of college football, when I really started getting into it, was like 2012, 2013-ish. So I was really young when 07 happened. I remember some of it, but I don't remember all of it. I wasn't always like people like Josh Pate, Bud Elliott, those guys. I wasn't their age. Like, they were probably around my age when that was happening back in 07. They remember that more fondly than I do. And so I didn't remember that as much. Looking at, the YouTube compilations and looking at the Wikipedia page. Yeah, it's the best season in the modern era, like from, after the 90s, since, in the 2000s era, going forward just as a collective century. Yeah, it's the best season we've had since, the year 2000 up until 2025. Yeah, it is the best season. There's no doubt. Now, my time as a college football fan, I actually think 2014 is my favorite in terms of me being an actual fan and watching these games as a person I can actually remember it versus being a youth back in 07 where I don't remember all of it. But yeah, I think 2014 to me was the last year of really good college football. First year of the playoffs, still had that. What's really weird is like 2014 to me, in a lot of ways, just from a general sense, felt sort of in a ways like liminal seasons almost, where we were the era of the BCS and the era of the college football playoff first started, but that era, that 2014 season still felt like the BCS year, like a BCS year in a lot of ways. It just had that same vibe to it. And maybe it's me looking for it through a nostalgic lens, because to me, I think, even then and up until even my final year of high school is very much so nostalgic now. That's kind of crazy to say that, but 2014 to me in a lot of sense is very nostalgic, but especially that football season, again, as someone who was really, really getting into it at that point, yeah, I have a lot of nostalgia for that year, and I think that was the best year of college football. Not only because it was the first year of the playoff and it was in that little liminal transitional phase, but it was just a lot of great talent. And I think that era, and I think Josh Pate's talked about this too, where I think you've noticed this a lot now, and especially as we sort of went away from, again, the BCS era into the playoff era, we've also sort of went away from the flash mode era. And this is what a term that Josh Pate has sort of used before on his show, where back in like 06, and I was really young, so I don't remember this, but even in 2014, I think a lot of folks noticed that the noise of stadiums back then, even on TV, were really loud. Like, for example, go back to that Auburn and Mississippi State game where it was like 2 versus 3. Your audio didn't cut out. That's just me giving you guys a pause here to think about that. That about basically 10 years ago, 10 years this past fall, Auburn Mississippi State was a 2 versus 3 matchup. Like, imagine that. Imagine telling yourself that today. Like, if you were to time travel from there to today, imagine telling yourself in the future, hey, or I don't know. I guess I don't know how that worked, but still, I mean, just imagine think about this to yourself. That 10 years ago, basically, Mississippi State and Auburn was a top 5, top 3 matchup. Like, it's insane. Obviously, now Mississippi State's changed so much, and they've had so many coaches, and so has Auburn now. Both coaches who are coaching in that game are not at Auburn or Mississippi State. Like the example I was using a few minutes ago. Imagine telling yourself, or imagine being who you are today and going back to 2014 and saying, hey, these 2 coaches in this game, Malzahn at Auburn, Dan Mullen at Mississippi State, both these guys are not only still coaching, but they're not coaching at their same schools. And maybe yourself in 2014, be like, oh, what happened to them? Did they go to the NFL? Did they, what happened? And then you just tell them, oh, yeah, Malzahn's the OC at Florida State. Okay, and then your next question is probably, oh, is Florida State, head coach is still Jimbo Fisher? Actually, no, it's some guy called Mike Norvell, who I believe at the time was the OC at, Arizona State, I believe at the time. Mind blown there, too. And then the other question is, okay, so where's Dan Mullen at? He's at UNLV. That's a mistake, right? UNLV, that's a downgrade. Yeah, it is a downgrade, but there are a lot of things that have happened in between them. But that just gauges you, I think, how long ago that season was. But to me, I think 2014 again represents sort of the era, the last sort of era or the last year of the loud crowd. Again, it's sort of that era, we're transitioning from the flashboard era to the cell phone era, which, look, even when I was at the Bucks game this year being 2025, counting the year, not the NFL season, but when I was at the Bucks game this year, I really noticed it too. And even at the Panthers game this past fall, where, this again, the something that Josh Page brought up a lot on his show, that the crowd noise for college and even the NFL to a certain extent is not as what it used to be. Games today in the modern era, being, from circa 2014, 13 onward, are just a lot quieter. There's no intimidation factor at all anymore. It's the transition from the flashlight era where you had, the old Kodak cameras and the big, bulky cameras you just carry around versus having an iPhone or Samsung phone or whatever, which, is not as heavy. But what I'm trying to say is that the crowd noise in 2014 is not the same as it is now. Again, the transition from the flashlight era to the cell phone era. And I think what Josh Payne has mentioned before, and I agree, is that the level of noise and crowd has completely decreased. And it's not the same anymore. In fact, stadiums have been extremely quiet. And part of that is just cell phone culture. Everyone has their cell phones out, and there's the famous photo of when, like, in the NBA, and this is the only time really mentioned the NBA, is when that famous photo a couple years ago when LeBron became the leading scorer in the NBA, when the shot he made, versus when, I believe, who it was it Kareem or was it, I don't know which player, maybe Michael Jordan, whoever, but the old record holder versus LeBron. And it's like, man, there's people holding cell phones in one photo versus people just watching it as a spectacle with nothing distracting them. And that's sort of the principle I have whenever I go to any of these games, where it's the Panthers-Chargers game this past fall for the NFL, or the Bucks game. I didn't bring my cell phone out at all. 0 times during the playing of game. I wanted to experience it through my own eyes, and I don't know, maybe it's just the old school thing I have, but I don't know. I'm one of those people where I don't need a cell phone to record stuff to have it be memorable. I think that's something that I've really, excuse me, I'm sniffling here, a little bit of allergies because of pollen and stuff, but it's really something I've really kind of grown accustomed to, where it's like, you don't really need your cell phone to experience stuff, but you can, there's these things you have to recall your eyes, right? And those things can, you have memory too, right? And I don't know, personal thing, but yeah, 2014 being the last of the flashlight era was great. Again, crowd noise was insane. Again, the Mississippi State Auburn game, again, I wasn't there, but man, watching that game on TV and even on YouTube, the replay, which it's on there, the highlights and stuff, man, Davis Wade Stadium was insane that day. Like, the crowd was insane. It was really loud, and it was a huge game atmosphere. But now today, and because of your cell phones and everyone's focused on getting the footage and not, yelling and screaming, the stadium's a lot quieter now. And I think 2014, in a sense, sort of was the last of the dying breed of the sort of the flashbolt-ish era. Now we're in the cell phone era where stadiums are a lot quieter now. So to a certain extent, look, there's times where the stadiums are loud. Again, think 2019 LSU, Bama, Georgia this past year. Sure, they're loud, but even then, it's like even the stadium loudness, even at those games, and even the Bama LSU game in 19, even that game was a little bit quieter than even games like 4 or 5 years ago. And that's sad to think about, but there's nothing you can do about it, right? There's nothing. People are still going to bring their cell phones to games. They're still going to record it, from their own supposed personal memories, even though, again, you have your own eyeballs to do it for you. But whatever. That's just me. But yeah, that's part of it. But another part of it too, bring the last part and we'll move on. Reason why I believe 2014 is the last good year of college football is just everything just felt different. You had a lot of things happening that year. Again, you had the Pac-12 was sort of at the height of its power. Stanford was still pretty good. Oregon with Mark Helfrich at the end of the Chip Kelly, Mark Helfrich era, with Mariota being there. You had the SEC being sort of like the Big 12 South was in 08 with like Mississippi State, Ole Miss, A&M at the beginning of the year, LSU to a certain extent with Leonard Fournette. Auburn was still sort of in its prime of the Malzahn era. Lane Kiffin was at Bama's first year. Blake Sims, Amari Cooper. Georgia had Todd Gurley. The ACC with the Jameis Winston stuff, and Florida State being, always in a close game every single week. You have, just a lot of excitement, a lot of weird stuff going on, a lot of major matchups, meaningful matchups. Again, just think about this. The entire SEC West that year was essentially equivalent to the 08 Big 12 South. If you don't remember that, go look it up on YouTube. There's a whole compilation of the Big 12 South in 08. that was the SEC in 2014. Just a massive talent, quarterbacks, coaches, a lot of just insane plethora. Even the worst team, even Arkansas, the worst team in the West that year, with Brett Bielema and Brandon Allen and company, and Alex Collins, who I believe he passed away recently, if I'm correct. It's an extremely talented division, and that division alone, any of those teams could have made noise in the playoff, which is insane to me. Not to mention, too, Ohio State losing to Virginia Tech, and Urban Meyer, and then winning their first national championship in the 2010s, if you will, and how insane that run that was, and have Ezekiel Elliott and that Sugar Bowl, and I think I still contend on this, and I think a lot of people do. That's probably the best playoff game we've had at all, period. Both 4-team and this past year 12-team playoff, and that game in itself has a lot of nostalgia for me, and there's so much stuff happening that year. And again, so many upsets too. Again, not only, I think back to that the weekend when Bama lost to Ole Miss and when A&M lost to Mississippi State, and that's the same weekend where I believe Oregon lost to Arizona. The most insane weekend to me in college football of me watching it. That to me was absolutely insane. So many upsets that year. Another weekend too was the Auburn losing to A&M. That was like the 3:30 game on CBS, and then after that was Vernon and Gary from Baton Rouge with LSU and Bama that year. Just all out, just so many memorable games, so many memorable weekends where it's like, man, just like even the quality was great. The CBS scorebug was peak, and the ESPN, now by the way, the final year of the classic ESPN scorebug before they change it over to the modern graphics package that started in the playoff. Now that's been a tradition now every couple years or so when they change it. But just again, so much nostalgia for that year, and I don't think we'll ever see a season like that ever again, in my opinion. Now, this year was close. I think number one was 2019, and number one after that was, I believe, was the year after COVID. I actually changed it. Yeah, I think the year after COVID is probably after this. I think 2019 would be after that, and then I think this past year. Those are some really good years, but I think 2014 will never, at least in my opinion, will never see a year like that ever again. Again, that was, the very tail end of the flashboard era, sort of, again, that liminal transition from the BCS to the playoff. We didn't really know what the playoff was going to be like. We didn't know the consequences it would lead to. Not to mention, too, conference alignment was still very minimal. And then again, just the quality of teams we had back then, and the SEC West in general. I know a lot of folks hate the SEC. A lot of folks, Danny Canals of the world and everything. We have to admit, the 2014 SEC West is up there with the Big 12 South in 08. It's up there. And in fact, even better than that, just how many quality teams, and how many, again, like all those teams and their total records, nobody had a losing record. Absolutely just insane how all those teams are so good. And nowadays you usually have a bottom dweller with, like, Mississippi State or Arkansas now sort of iron itself out. But man, 2014 was an insane year, and I definitely don't believe we'll ever have a year like that ever again. And again, some of it's biased, some of it, again, nostalgic, mostly to a certain extent that I wasn't old enough to remember 2007 that much. I remember it, but again, I was still a youth. No, that's a very nostalgic year for me, and I think that was the best year, at least in my college football viewing history. That was number one, and it'll always be number one thing for a while. Next question here, sort of a newsy-ish topic. Thoughts on Deion Sanders' comments on spring games. If you haven't heard or didn't see yesterday, Deion Sanders at a press conference in Boulder as they have started spring practice, and he mentioned, they will have a spring game, and he's sort of acknowledging all these spring games being canceled left and right. And he brought up something interesting that people like Josh Pates brought up, and even I've agreed with Josh on this. And I don't agree with everything with Josh, especially him, putting an I next to every single word and calling it plural. Sorry, Josh, I disagree with that. But I do agree with Josh and Deion Sanders to a certain extent that this is his idea, or the idea that Josh Pate's been sort of, parading around, is having your spring game not just be a game one-on-one, but why not reach out to a G5 or HBCU or an FCS team and make that your spring game. Actually have it be a meaningful game, get the networks involved, and actually have something other than you're playing yourself, your second and third teamers. I think what Deion was saying, I totally agree with, and I hope that happens. I hope people like Deion and some of these other coaches who maybe aren't bold enough to say the quiet thing out loud maybe someone like Deion Sanders saying it out loud now will hopefully get people to go in that direction versus going the route Ole Miss has been going with Lane Kiffin. They've been doing this before, doing the Ole Miss fun games or whatever it's called, and now with USC canceling their spring game and Nebraska's not doing one anymore, and a lot of people, especially the NFL types, who say, "Oh, it's a spring game, blah, paw, couldn't care about it, don't care about it, whatever." Well, you have to understand is that everyone, first of all, is like you. Most of you who are, the sort of us bow tie crowd who have enough money to afford to go to some of these games or have the luxury to go to some of these games. A lot of folks who are college football fans, the most of the demographics, they can't necessarily go to a game in the fall all the time, whether it's because of work stuff, travel implications, money, because now games are getting more expensive now, and not to mention, too, TVs are also getting bigger and bigger and better and better. That's another thing, too, I forgot to mention with the previous question. Another reason why I think crowd noise is getting worse because not everyone's going to the games anymore. Everyone's watching on TV. And, like I said, TVs are getting bigger and better and, high definition, ultra 4K, 8K, whatever it's called now. You can also watch games on your phone, with laptop, tablet, whatever. But people usually go, when you go to these spring games, it's your only opportunity to either go back to campus for the first time in a long time if you're an alumni, or just to go to a game and have something to do for the weekend. I mean, it's sad now that people won't have the opportunity to do that. If you're a Nebraska fan, a USC fan, or even an Ole Miss fan, they don't have that luxury, and we don't have the, the trip, that spring trip that I know most of you, mostly, I don't know what I just said there, but most of you do make that trip. Most of you use that date, the spring game, to make it a vacation and, make a weekend out of it. And, arrive on that Friday, maybe, I don't know, go to the bars or whatever. If you're going for a group of friends from college and you're going there and you're hanging out and you go to the game afterwards, it's like that was your time to actually go to an affordable game. And those games were affordable. Either they were free or very, very cheap. They're not there anymore. They're going away. And I think what Deion Sanders is bringing up, getting networks involved, getting, reaching out to different teams and saying, hey, do you guys want to play us? We'll give you, your check and whatever, especially if you're a G5 or a FCS team. And I think that's absolutely genius. I mean, think about this. If you had, I know a lot of folks complain about this too, about having these G5s FCS games in the season. Like, if you really hate those and you really don't like those, why not move that game, or I guess one of those games, to the spring? Probably the FCS game, right? Because I would imagine that'll be the less of the, the worst of the lower classification schools you face, because at their talent level, comparing an FCS to a G5 is still a pretty decent gap there. But if you don't want your FCS game during the season and you still have a spring game, just move the FCS game to the spring. Make that your spring game. Get the networks involved. They're getting ABC, NBC, CBS, Fox, SEC Network. They get more money. They're happy. The teams are happy. The FCS team gets their check, and they get their money, and their players can also, showcase themselves. And then again, the other crowd will come in and say, oh, you're also exposing even more players in the transfer portal. Buddy, I hate to tell you this, but after listening to the guys like, Bud Elliott and those guys on Cover 3, a spring game in general isn't the only way coaches get their footage of players or prospective players they get in the transfer cycle. There's other ways to do it, and then watching a game on a major network spring game, or a major network airing a spring game, is not the only way to get footage. So, hate to break the news to you, buddy. That's not totally the way it works. So, yeah, I agree with Deion Sanders. I think he's totally correct in that. I totally support him in that, and I wouldn't be surprised if this does happen. I think it will happen. Given, Deion's power and his, celebrity status, why not? And I think, a lot of people hate Deion Sanders. I don't. There may be some things I don't like about the way he's done things there. Necessarily, they're not the classical things you have to do. Not great. He has to do that because the situation he inherited was very dire. And I think it's really shown the success rate there has been mostly fairly good. Every single year they've improved. And I do like that Deion is, and being sort of an ambassador for this idea that Josh Pettis had, and something that I've supported too, that, why not make a spring game an actual game versus a game when you're playing against yourself? Why not ask Mr. Juice about it? Yeah, sure, the price may go up, but if it's a game against an FCS team, whether it's at HBCU or not, excuse me, still be pretty affordable. You'll still get people in the seats. So I would totally support that thing from Deion Senior. So yeah, I totally agree with that. I saw those comments here every day and totally support what he's saying there. And hopefully, I really hope it does happen. It'll be pretty cool. Who doesn't want, who doesn't want to have a spring games being back? And not to mention they're meaningful. And look, it's not required or anything, but if you want to do that, I think the option should be there for you. Okay, another sort of newsiest question here. So, what do I make of players opting into EA Sports College Football 26 getting more money? So, if you haven't heard or haven't seen, this sort of broke. Actually, while I was recording the show for today, Tuesday, while I'm recording this Tuesday's show. Of course, now with this being posting on Thursday, this is a couple of days old, but according to a lot of people like Brandon Marcello at 247 Sports, CBS Sports 2, it's part of it. But anyway, EA Sports will, this is coming from Brandon on Twitter, saying, quote, EA Sports will compensate players who opt into CFB26 with a minimum payment of $1,500 and a deluxe edition of the copy of the game, the console of their choice, and that's the deal. And then that's what a EA Sports representative told CBS Sports. The players were compensated $600 for CFB25, and that's what Brandon Marcello said on Twitter. That's being reported by a lot of people, and I think this is good news. Great. Of course, CFB25 has been out for almost a year now. This time last year, it's kind of crazy. We were, we had just gotten the first trailer for the teaser. Then I think this time we were, seeing a lot of folks interview people like Matt Brown and a lot of these channels like Tubby Light and Trash Your Football, some of the smaller channels. And of course, Bordeaux was exploding at that time, and it was big back then. But a lot of those channels were covering the news and stuff. And the hype for that game was really real. And it really did carry us a lot, even though the game wasn't around. It sort of did what it's doing now, which is carrying us for the spring and summer, and it really did. And then the game comes out, and it's good. Not perfect. It's flawed, but it's a good baseline. Hopefully the new game has a lot of new features and improving some stuff and plussing it. But the fact that we're getting more money, it being now, was it $1,000 now? So they're making, $1,000 plus some change. That's good. I think $1,500, it's pretty good. Not to mention you get a copy of the day game on whatever console you have or prefer. That's pretty good. And I think that's good that they're getting paid higher. If I grant you, of course, there's some folks who would, players who would do it for free, right? For example, Lane Kiffin, coach, what was it, like last year, a couple years ago, said, yeah, I'd do it for free if I really wanted to. And, of course, he's going to be at the game because the cover leaked. He didn't realize that, but yeah, the cover, at least the photos should have them getting the photo of the players and the coaches who are going to be in the game. At least it confirms they'll be in the game. They got leaked out. So you haven't seen that yet, go search the internet. It's pretty much available everywhere. It's not been taken down or anything. So, yeah, some news from EA Sports. And I'm assuming, based on the cover shoot being last week or at some point last week at the Rose Bowl, would reasonably assume that we'll probably get even more news soon. If we're getting news now and it's starting to trickle out now because we've got the cover shoot and the cover for the deluxe edition leaked out. Now we're getting this news from 24/7 Sports and Brandon Marcello and other people are saying it. Don't be surprised. I'm not reporting anything on anything, but don't be surprised we start to get some more news and maybe some even bigger news. Coming soon to a theater near you. So just keep an eye on that. Of course, when it does, we'll cover it. It's a little of a breaking news question there. So yeah, that's a big deal, and that's good. And look, I know some players would do it for free, but I think them being compensated for and getting paid even more money for it's good. Nothing wrong with making some extra money. Who doesn't want more money? I'm gonna take a little break here. I'm gonna get some water real quick. I know we're live. I'm treating it like I'm live, and then we'll continue. We have even more questions. Look, this show's probably gonna go for well over an hour, so strap in. By the way, too, if you have not subscribed yet to the channel, if you're listening to this, please do so. It helps us out a lot, or helps us out a lot. We're still a pretty small channel, but we're growing a little bit, and we're have some things planned potentially throughout the summer and spring, later this spring. So keep an eye on that. Maybe some guests coming on the show. We'll see. Still working on that. But yeah, make sure you subscribe to the channel. like the stream, or in this case, the video. And if you're on Spotify, make sure you give us a 5-star review, subscribe to the podcast feed, and follow us on Twitter as well. Okay, question 5 here as we move along. This is going to be a good question. Why is Andor, the Star Wars show, so divisive? So this is the topic I've been really sitting on for a while. If you guys haven't noticed, the Andor season 2 trailer, the final season, because it's only 2 seasons now, it was originally going to be like 5 or 6, I believe, but it's now 2 because the budget was going way too extreme. Final season's coming out. Trailer came out a couple weeks ago. It looks good visually. Look, I'll say this about Andor, and I think a lot of folks can agree on this. From a visual standpoint, from a visual perspective, right? From a technical standpoint, it's a beautiful show. It's probably the best visually looking Star Wars show we've had in general, period. Better than The Mandalorian, better than Ahsoka, better than Skeleton Crew, better than Obi-Wan, obviously better than Boba Fett, clearly. From a visual standpoint, that's the quality I think we would expect from Lucasfilm and Disney and that budget. That's great. From that standpoint, that's good if they're actually, utilizing the budget in some ways. And grant you the type of show that it is, that maybe one of that budget for Kenobi, but again, from a technical standpoint, from a visual standpoint, it's a beautiful show. It really is. Why is it so divisive? Yeah. So look, I think the first season of Andor, I never really touched on this that much. I don't mind it. It's fine. Is it my favorite show? Is it, a show that I would distribute copies to all my friends who are not necessarily Star Wars fans? No, not really. I mean, it's good. And there's some good performances. The guy who was at Skarsgård, who was in the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, he was Will Turner's dad. He's in there and he's pretty good. He was also was the professor guy in the Thor movies. Was it Dr. Selvig, I believe? Yeah, Skarsgård. I mean, he's a good actor. I think he did a pretty good job in this show. Of course, you have Diego Luna from Rogue One is in there. We're him playing casting again. That's cool. Of course, this coming up season we'll have Middleton coming back as Krennic. Yeah, that's cool. Got more Forrest Whitaker as Saw Gerrera. Gerrera, of course, connection to Rogue One and Rebels and Clone Wars. So, I mean, look, there's parts of the season or the trailer that were pretty good. The song they used, I think a lot of people agree on this. It's kind of strange. Not really something I would deem appropriate for a show like that, but whatever. Again, visually looks pretty good. Yeah, I'm glad we're getting, because I think Rogue One, to a certain extent, is the best movie they put out. At least Star Wars has on the Disney umbrella. But the reason why it's so divisive is just the style of the show and the way people like Tony Gilroy and the guys behind the show. And of course, you don't know Tony Gilroy, the guy who did some of like the Bourne movies, the Jason Bourne movies. He was the one that basically saved the movie Rogue One when it was being produced. And you guys don't remember this back in the day. I can't believe it's almost 10 years ago, but that movie was a total disaster. Like, if you guys think that some of these films, like Captain America: Brave New World and the Marvels and stuff like that, out of the MCU lately, especially Captain America: Brave New World, that if you think that those movies were a total disaster behind the scenes, Rogue One was even worse. So that movie literally had to be totally reshot. Basically, on 90% of the film was redone. Gareth Edwards was basically silently demoted or fired. Now, he still did some stuff. He was the one who, by the way, shot the Darth Vader hallway scene, which it was a scene that he added in. I firmly, and I will say this, I don't know if this is sure or not, but I firmly don't believe that Tony Gilroy had anything to do with that. I don't believe he really wanted that, personally. At least that's my opinion. After hearing some of the stuff he said before in the past and interviews and stuff, I'm pretty sure he didn't approve of that. I'm sure he probably didn't like that. At least them adding that scene in him. But Tony, he literally saved that movie in the editing room, and they reshot all at the end of the movie, and it saved it. I think that's what I think a lot of us were hoping Captain America: Brave New World was going to be, but it didn't. It wasn't like that. But so people are just really divisive because of the stuff, or at least the approach that Gilroy goes with it, where it's very, I don't know, it's a very different feel than what you're used to. Like, the way I view Andor, even when the show was announced, the way the mindset I was going into it with Andor is that, okay, it's sort of, kind of the live action, more mature version of what Rebels was, right? And it takes place during the same timeline, and some of the characters cross over being Saw. So that's kind of what it is, right? It's basically a live action really ultra mature version of Rebels, pretty much. It's basically telling you the same story, which is why when the show is announced, I'm like, okay, we did this in Rebels. We don't need to tell the story of the rebellion all over again, but whatever, it's fine. And also, by the way, if you're anyone who's still hoping for any, Rebels connections from those characters appearing in the second season, even despite the fact that they're clearly doing some very soft connections to events in the later half of that show, I'm sorry to spoil it, but I don't think you're going to. None of that's been rumored. If it is the case, and they've done a really good job of keeping it sealed, but I highly doubt there will be any connections to Rebels at all. Probably not. In fact, probably zero meaningful connections. There will be one with, the Gorman massacre, which was in Rebels and was referenced a lot, especially in later seasons. But that's kind of it. That's not going to be like a very cohesive connection to this, and I think that's where Andor in a lot of ways lost people. Is just it's not the way you view Star Wars and the way that you view the Easter eggs and the connections and the lore building and the lightsabers being around and Jedi and stuff like that and aliens. And look, all that stuff's good, and I think that's great. And if you want to balance some stuff and do more mature stuff, I don't have no problem with that either. But I think the way Andor went with it, or went around things, or did certain things, and how the way Tony Gilroy sort of speaks about the show, that pissed off a lot of people, and to a certain extent, including me, because I think, again, the way you think of Star Wars, not just think about lightsabers and stormtroopers and stuff like that, and the classical things you would assume, but it's not even just that. It's not even just some of that stuff in general. It's just the lore building, the connections and Easter eggs and the things that, for example, back when the show before the first season came out, Josh over at Damn Nerds, who I respect a lot, he put out a video about why he's so excited about Andor. When he was excited for it, and spoiler, he did not. He completely dislikes the show. And look, that's fine. I respect Josh and his opinions. I don't fully agree with him, but I do agree it's not my favorite show, and I don't personally have a lot of enjoyment of watching it. Well, I mean, it's not terrible either, but it's not my favorite. But he at least he did a video before the show came out about why he's excited about Andor, and he goes over all this stuff and possible connections with Rebels and stuff like that, and what we thought the show was going to be, and what we hoped it was going to be, and what the vibe was probably going to be. And given that we were already getting Rebels characters in live action coming into the Ahsoka show at the time of Vandor coming out, they were filming that stuff, and there was people hoping that they would bring in some of that stuff. Turns out not the case, and I think it pissed off a lot of people. And I just think too, this whole thing about Andor, the vibe it's going for, again, it clashes a lot of Star Wars. Now it's very mature, sort of in a lot of ways. And here's another way to look at it too. If Andor, the actual show, the way it's structured and the themes and the matureness and some of the acting, if this was for, let's just say, I don't know, Secret Invasion, if it was like this, if it was, I mean, not that. If this was for like an HBO show, maybe Secret Invasion is not the best example of this, but if Andor, the way it's produced and made and the vibe of it, if that was like a HBO show or something like that, that would be great. If this was like a sci-fi show that was not anything related to Star Wars, you took away the Star Wars title and Stormtroopers and Rebellion Empire, this would actually be a pretty good show in principle. But because you have the Star Wars name tied to it, because you have some of these things, and the fact that it takes place during Rebels and it's a show that a lot of folks adore, me for a long time didn't feel that way, but after watching that to prepare for Ahsoka, I have better appreciation for it, Rebels. But the fact that it's taking place during the same time frame as that show, and you have the Star Wars label on it, and you have certain expectations in terms of cameos and Easter eggs, that pissed off a lot of people. And look, I don't blame them for that. I feel the same way. But I don't know. I mean, look, it's a divisive show. It's coming out. Will I cover on the show here, per se? Maybe. If there's anything meaningful in it, yeah, I will bring it up and I'll give you guys my thoughts on it. But is it a show that between Andor and Ahsoka season 2, which one am I more excited about? I'd definitely say Ahsoka season 2, because that's more of what what my vibe is with with building the lore, cameos, and not cameos all the time, but just like Easter eggs and stuff, and building the lore, and building up some stuff, with stuff Dave's doing, and him, bringing in some stuff from Star Wars Legends and stuff like that, and the whole stuff on Perudia and stuff. That stuff interests me more than what they're doing in Andor. Again, like I said, when this show was announced, my initial thoughts were, they're telling the same story that Star Wars Rebels told, but it's of different characters, and it's going to be more mature, I guess. And that's kind of what it is, and unfortunately doesn't have the same vibe to it, nor will it have any meaningful connections either. So, again, it's divisive. That's kind of why it is. And look, some of you guys like that show, and a lot of people do like it. There's no doubt about that. And look, if you do like it, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not going to force you to think the way I do, but from my perspective, it's not my favorite thing. Again, if I were to choose this over like Ahsoka season 2, would take the second season of Ahsoka over this. But again, like I said, from a quality standpoint, from a technical standpoint, it's the best visually looking show that they have done, period, from Marvel or Star Wars, heck, and even any show Disney Plus has done, and that's cool. But the fact that you had bigger shows in terms of audience and hype for Kenobi and even Mandalorian season 3, it's like you couldn't have that same quality to those shows. Like, I don't know, that's part of the problem with excuse me here, I moved away from the camera I'm using for YouTube, but that's part of the problem with Star Wars and Disney Plus in general. That's one of them. I brought this up last week. Okay, got a couple more questions here. I'll go through these more quicker here, as we're almost reaching an hour. I've literally been talking for 2 hours now, so how about that? So next question here, who was better, Dak at Mississippi State, so it'll be like 2014-15, or Cam at his lone season at Auburn? This is something I've actually talked about personally between people I know. Look, I think both of these guys in college, I'm not discussing the NFL stuff, that's a little bit different. In terms of college, both of these quarterbacks both have their own careers, their own story. Both of these guys have their own great careers in their own right. Dak's at Mississippi State, elevating a under-resourced program of a fan base that cheers like hell every single Saturday, regardless of how bad their team is. And again, like I mentioned, it's an under-resourced program. In our lifetimes, you never had a team that, up until when Dak got there, that was very meaningful, and probably never again. I mean, what Dak did at Mississippi State, getting them to number 1 ranking, a 10-win season, a 9-win season after that against stuff that we will probably never see again at least in my lifetime. Like, the next time Mississippi State is ever number 1 in football and has like a 10-0 record or whatever it was, and they went to Bama that year, or heck, even a 10-win season, the next time that happens, I will be in the cemetery. That will never happen again in my lifetime. And I think what Dak did there, and I firmly believe he deserves a statue there, not to mention him and Dan Mullen both. What they both did there, extremely historic, and so much, again, just the talent level there at Mississippi State, at least that team was not very good. Now, it was a senior-laden team. It's a very veteran-laden team, but not as talented. And that's where people do this comparison thing, and that's my argument for Mississippi State when people do the Dak versus Cam. Which one was a better career? Well, the reason why I bring up Dak, or at least defend them, again, it's the talent level. What Cam was working out at Auburn, much better than what Dak was in at Mississippi State. What Dak had at Mississippi State from, again, a resource standpoint, sports science, nutrition, overall talent on the roster, way worse than what Cam had at Auburn. And a lot of folks will bring up that Auburn team, and look, it's the least talented team to ever won a national championship, at least in the modern era. A lot of these guys, with the exception of Cam and Nick Fairley, did not make it to the NFL. A lot of these guys fizzled out. Even Michael Dyer did not have a very good college career after that first season. But in terms of the difficulty situation, Dak's is way harder. I'm sorry. I know a lot of folks will say Cam's is a lot worse, and he actually lifted Auburn's national championship. The talent Auburn had there, well, it wasn't like talent that would get to the NFL per se, or their names would be called in the draft. And while it was, also very veteran senior lane talent, that team was still had, recruiting classes on top of recruiting classes of decently talented players that the previous administration recruited, being the Tuberville administration. Like, those guys were still recruiting at a pretty decent level. Those guys stuck around, and those guys grew, and they happened to get a good piece at quarterback and a very favorable home schedule to where they had a good season. And Cam was a very good player in terms of elevating that team. Whereas, Dak at Mississippi State, who elevated a very shitty roster, a team, again, from a resource standpoint, from a nutrition standpoint, sports science, and talent, way worse than Auburn. Again, I'm sorry, but the talent level at Auburn with Cam was there was extremely better than what Mississippi State had with Dak. I'm sorry, but that's how it is. If you want to complain at me, go look at the 247 rankings and the recruiting rankings from, the early 2010s, and you can see what I'm talking about. Just the level of difficulty, again, based on talent, resources, sports, and nutrition, and the things available to you as a player at Auburn, way better than at Mississippi State's level of difficulty. in terms of the success he had based on that, and that being a major factor, that to me goes to Dak. Whereas Auburn with Cam, yes, it's a great year, historic year, but again, from a difficulty standpoint, I'm sorry, I think Dax is more impressive from that standpoint in terms of what he did there. But if you're going to go just a journal standpoint, both of them are pretty good. Dak had a really good season in 2014 as a Heisman candidate for most of the year. Same in 2015. Yeah, I know people will bring up, well, he didn't beat Bama, nor did he, beat, Georgia or whatever, or any of those really talented teams. It doesn't matter, though. Like, he still had a good year. What we're going to take away having a good year or whatever? Like, yeah, him not beating Bama isn't all on him. Some of it is just, again, the talent roster. The roster's really bad. And he elevated a very good veteran-laden team, Mississippi State, not talent, but veteranness and leadership. And I think that's what Dak was able to do at Mississippi State and what Cam did at Auburn. But again, the difficulty level there is completely different. So there's my rant on that. Question 7 here. Can Marvel recover from its recent failures? I've touched on this before. Yes, they can. Yes, there's things we are looking forward to as Marvel fans with Doomsday, Fantastic Four coming up, and Secret Wars. Yes, they can recover from this. Is it going to be easy? Is it going to be a smooth transition? No, there's still a lot of things that they haven't released yet that are not good. And personally, I think there are things that they should cancel. Ironheart's one. I think there's some other stuff like the Wonder Man show. I don't think anyone's interested in that. And I think with Marvel, to a certain extent, probably should have canceled those shows. And again, I know folks will bring it back and say, hey, that was the show that you guys are worried about too, and that was pretty good. That's true. That was a good success for them, and I think that was a show that they were clearly worried about. Then it turns out people actually were kind of buying into it, and it did fairly well. However, that may have been a false positive based on what I'm hearing about Ironheart and Wonder Man and how there's no vibe, there's no buzz around it. Even with Agatha, there was no buzz around it whatsoever, except for the connections to Wanda Maximoff, Scarlet Witch. That's kind of it. And I don't think those shows had the same leg as Agatha did based on the connections to Wanda Maximoff and everyone being a fan of her and Elizabeth Olsen. I just don't think those shows coming up had that same, I guess, hype to it. But yeah, I think Marvel can clearly recover, and I think they are showing signs of that. But it's gonna be tough. It's gonna take a little bit, but I think they can do it. Question 8 here: is Miami primed to be a yearly threat in the ACC? I think so. I think what Miami is doing under Mario, they're getting recruiting really well. They're stacking recruiting talent. We'll see what they do this year for quarterback, where it's Carson Beck or it's someone else if Beck's ready to go. But yeah, they should be pretty good. Now, of course, a lot of you bring up Clemson and how they've had some recent success in recruiting. And look, I'll acknowledge it. Yes, we haven't had a chance to do that, but yes, golf clap to Dabo and Clemson. They're doing fairly well so far in recruiting for this next cycle, which is good. Again, Clemson, they've done well. They've turned over the staff. They're using the portal now. Finally, that's all good. But can they do that consistently now? Can they continue to do that? Can Dabo can he actually get out of his own way and not be in denial and actually start to make changes that us who are not as smart as he is as a coach, who are not qualified to be a coach, even us looking at what they've been doing recently and saying, oh, that's not good enough. I'm not even a Clemson fan, and I totally agree with you guys. That's not the standard at Clemson. Losing to Louisville after you guys had a literal bye advantage in your schedule and you lost it by 14 points. That's not Clemson football. That's not the standard you guys set there. And I think with Miami rising, with Florida State, hopefully Norvell and those guys can figure something out there. There's other threats there to Miami that are not just, it's not just Miami that's on the table too. There's other teams, even SMU, Fred Lashley. People forget they're in the ACC. A lot of them, they're in the conference title game last year, and they're a missed field goal away from even winning that game. They're there too. So it's not just Miami per se. There's some other teams too, but I think the best program and the one that's primed to be a yearly threat with the game, as long as they folks down in Coral Gables give Mario some time to build that thing up and continue to get talent there, because there wasn't much talent there to begin with. Remember, they lost to Middle Tennessee. MTSU their first year, and you've seen how far they've come. So it's talent there when he first got there was not good enough. It was good, but wasn't the things that he needed to be successful. Now he's about to have it, and I think this year and years to come, again, based mostly on your waiting on the quarterback because you wasted Cam Ward. Now you have, the changeover at defensive coordinator. Hopefully that's an improvement. I think it will be. Yeah, Miami will be primed to be a threat in the ACC when they haven't been for the past 20 years or so since they've been there. They've only been to the ACC championship game one time, and that was under Mark Richt, and that was his best year. So, yes, Miami can be a prime candidate for ACC contention, but it's all down to the quarterback, at least for this year and the coming years. Question 9 here. How did I get into weather? Loaded question. Of course, you've been wondering, I've been on this show, we talk a lot about, of course, obviously college football, Marvel, Star Wars, and some DC stuff, especially on today's show, the live show I did earlier. This one, in terms of weather, now we talk about weather sometimes, especially if it's affecting the show. Last year, the hurricanes here in Florida, that's why I didn't do a lot of Thursday shows or vice versa, Tuesday shows, because there were hurricanes coming in. I wasn't doing a live show when I could easily lose power. So I'm not doing that. Same for next year. If that happens, this happens this next fall, same protocol. We'll just combine shows if we have to, which would mean doing a reaction and preview for the coming slate of games. But how did I get into the weather? Well, what happened during grade school is when I was a youth and browsed the internet as a young child does on their home computer, big computer. And I started browsing around and, look at the YouTube recommended, and I see a couple of videos on storm chasing and tornadoes. The first video I remember watching, or one of them, two ones I remember watching, was Reed Timmer's video of the Manitoba, Canada tornado. It was in 2007. And you may have seen it before. It's one of his most popular videos, too. It's like, what, got like millions and millions of views. It's the one where it's like the big, wedge tornado. And it's in Canada, too, by the way. It's not in the United States. It's in Manitoba. And it's this big wedge tornado. It's in a mess. The field's not moving anywhere. And it's like amazing footage, by the way. It's really good footage, too, for being a 2008 or 2007. So that video of the 2007 Manitoba tornado from Reed Timmer, the first storm chasing video I ever saw. And I have a lot of nostalgia for that video. It's very cool. Again, for being 2007 footage, it's really amazing that it's holding up this well. The other video that really got me into tornadoes and weather, got me fascinated into them, was the McConnell Air Force Base footage from the 1991 April 26th outbreak. A very, very violent outbreak, too. I think a lot of was like 22 people died, 50 plus tornadoes were reported that day. High risk day. Certainly up there with the upper echelon outbreaks in this country. Certainly one that really doesn't get talked about that much, especially nationally. Now, if you're from the plains and you grew up during that time frame, of course you remember that day probably fondly. But with me, when I discovered that video, and that's the video again at the Air Force Base there in Wichita. It's the famous video. I'm sure if you're a weather enthusiast, you've seen it before at least once, where it's the airman who was filming this. By the way, he got in trouble for this too. I don't think a lot of folks realize that. The guy who shot that footage at the McConnell Air Force Base, he got in trouble for that. I don't know if he was still in the military after that. Probably not. But he was filming the tornado that was coming into Wichita. This is eastern Wichita, by the way. It's in the other suburb of Andover, where the tornadoes coming in. It's very small in terms of size, and it wasn't a big wedge. Yet it was a very photogenic tornado too. The video starts out in the distance, and it's there. You can actually see it sort of snaking around the base a little bit, and it gets closer and closer, and you hear the air raid siren going off, and as it gets closer and closer, the siren turns off because the power goes out, and then you see the tornado, as it gets close to the camera, grows in size, and you see the debris cloud, and you see stuff flying around, and you see just the raw power of this tornado, which at the point was getting close to F5 status, I believe, which is correct terminology, by the way, because the EF scale didn't come out until the 2000s, so this is an F5 technically, or EF5, whatever, at least in this time frame. But it was getting very close to EF5 level of strength. I was obviously getting close to that. And the thing about that video that really sucks to me, and it still sticks to me to this day, is when you see in the video, highly recommend you watch it. Just look up Andover, Kansas tornado, Air Force Base, AFB, I guess, and you'll see it. It's like the first result. It has like over 1 million views. When a tornado, again, it's coming by the guy with the camera who's videotaping it, the airman, you see the power line that's next to him in the video in the parking lot. The raw, I don't know how to explain this, but the raw electricity from that power pole just gets sucked out of it. Incredible. I've never seen that before. Of course, this is me being a youth, and I'm sitting there looking googly-eyed. I'm like, wow, this is me being like 5 or 6 years old. Like, this is both the most terrifying thing I've ever seen before. Well, I'm also curious and I want to learn more about this. And I learned more about it, and I eventually learned about other massive tornado events. Eventually, I learned about James Spann, the famous meteorologist in Birmingham, the chief there, still around to this day. And found out about him, and I watched, by the way, Spann and his team, his group of meteorology friends, they do their weather podcast, the Weather Brains, and they just had their 1,000th show yesterday evening. So, God clap the Spann and Company and Weather Brains. 1,000 shows. Hopefully, we'll get there at some point. We will. But so I got started because of watching those videos, and eventually I grew and grew more into it. And I actually had the privilege to actually tour a weather service office several years ago. This is back when I was in grade school still, and that was pretty cool. And yeah, just always had a fascination with weather and atmospheric science. Originally, I wanted to major in that, actually, and that was my original plan to do that. It didn't work out necessarily. Not the best at math. No, fairly good at it, but math in its general sense is not my favorite thing to do. The science part of it, of weather, is the thing I'm more fascinated in, fascinated with. And, you know, of course, I'm one of those nerds, too, where I have, you know, radar scope on my phone and my iPad. And, you know, just like last Friday, Saturday's event, you know, as everyone was watching the conference tournaments, I was watching Ryan Hall and look at the radar on Radar Scope or Radar Omega. So, yeah, that's how I got into weather. You know, just by watching YouTube videos of tornadoes and storm chasing and all that. And that's where I really fell in love with it. And like I've said before, and I'll say again, my dream is to, I mean, that's not necessarily see a tornado, but at least a water spout. I've never seen them before. I believe I've seen a funnel cloud one time, I believe, or a wall cloud a couple of times, or at least some rotation. You know, it wasn't anything meaningful before even actually here in Jacksonville. It happened a couple of springs ago. But in terms of a water spout, even I haven't seen that before. And water spouts in general really fascinate me. They're both creepy and eerie, but also very beautiful and amazing to watch. And just the science behind them, how they can form, is just incredible. So I've never seen those before. But one of my other dreams is to shadow the storm chasing crew professionally. I understand the risks. I understand that you could easily die during that. I know maybe my parents and family members may not necessarily agree with that, and they may think that's, you know, maybe putting your life on the line there, but I would do it with professionals. I wouldn't do it on my own. I would go with someone who's actually pretty experienced. But yeah, that's how I got into weather. Very fascinating. There's obviously a lot of channels I would recommend watching, by the way, if you're interested in it. You know, James Spann's one of them. He does his own weather briefings for Alabama, or the state of Alabama in general, even nationally. Ryan Hall, mentioned him before. Internet's weatherman, he's very good. Max Velocity, very good. Similar. Both these guys go live during weather events, whether it be hurricanes, tropical storms, tornadoes, damaging winds, are live when it's a big event. And another one, if you really want to get the actual science behind it, the numbers and the looking at all the photographs and the surface maps and whatever, and to get the science behind these tornadoes and look at past case studies. Trey over at Convective Chronicles, it's a good channel to look at for that type of stuff. You're really into, like me, who I like watching Trey, you know, going over, for example, this past weekend's outbreak and going over certain case studies of previous historical events. That's a good channel to go to. Very good source of learning some stuff. And he also has some course, like almost like a course, if you will, for reading photographs and stuff. And they're really interesting. So if you want to learn more about that, whether you're into meteorology as a hobby or doing it for a major, would recommend. Any of those channels would recommend to learn about weather. Last question here, and then we'll get out of here. Which is better, the NCAA tournament or the college football playoff? This is a tough question because I like both. I'm not a big college basketball fan per se. I watch it sometimes. I don't watch it every single day nor every single time they have games. But if it's a big game, I'll watch. The tournament, I'll watch. I'll fill the bracket like most of you. I've done that already. Do I think one's better than the other? Not really. They both have their flaws. Both have their pros, right? College football, yes. Does it give you more college football? Does it extend the season a little bit? Yes, I agree with that. Does the NCAA tournament give you insanity? Does it give you weirdness? Does it give you variables most of the time? Not all the time, but some of the time. Yes, it's a lot of fun. It's a basketball and football. I think the structure of both, particularly basketball, it just works as it's basketball, right? It's a sport where you don't have to have so much travel or bring a lot of equipment, and you don't have a massive football field. The vibe of it's a lot different. That's why I like the tournament stuff of that better. Whereas for college football, I've always found, I'll still say this, that the 14 playoff or even just the BCS was good enough. And that's why I think this whole 12-team playoff, and just from a logistical standpoint, from a player standpoint, how do I feel about playing a literal NFL schedule in those cases? Especially if you're a G5 team, you didn't win your conference championship, you don't have a bye, at least in this current structure. Yeah, you're basically playing up until week 1, all the way until national championship game. You're playing a modern NFL schedule, and most of these guys aren't used to that. Now, most of you, the argument will be like, "Well, duh, they have to get used to it because most of those people will play a schedule like that." And you're right about that to a certain extent, but it's like I've said before to people personally, with any of these changes, do I ever hear the fans being brought up or the players being brought up when these changes are being made? I don't. If you do, then find me one, because I have never heard that before. So, yeah, is one better than the other? I mean, not really, I guess. I don't have much of a big opinion on this, but from a pure spectacle standpoint, from a pure chaos standpoint, I would actually say the NCAA tournament's better, because the sport of college basketball revolves around it. College football, at least in my opinion, revolves around the regular season, but now it's not, and it's geared towards like how the NFL is and the NBA, where it's geared towards the pro season. I don't like that, and I know folks will disagree with me on that, but whatever. We can agree to disagree. I'm not going to sit here and yell and scream. And look, I've had some of you guys bring up valuable arguments too, counter arguments. Like one person told me that, or most of you have told me, hey, it does extend the season now. The gap in between spring practice and the championship is a lot smaller. That's true, but still, there's a lot of news in between that, right? You had signing day. You had going over the past season and doing some reflection stuff and reviewing the past season. There's still stuff to do, but that's a very bad argument, though. I will say that. And this is a very long show, and I've got to get out of here. So, again, this is a pre-recorded show. This will premiere on Thursday. So this is not live, and this is being recorded on March 18th. This will go on the 20th. And I stated that back towards the beginning, and more of a Q&A show. But again, make sure you subscribe. Just because it's not live, at least on YouTube, doesn't mean we're ignoring the typical things we say, the typical boilerplate stuff. So again, make sure subscribe. Make sure you hit the button, like the stream or like the video, I guess, and make sure you follow us in the podcast feed and Twitter. So until long show here, long day for me. Until the next time I see you guys will be when I'm releasing this next Tuesday. Until then, take care. Have a great rest of your weekend, and I'll see you guys on Tuesday.